Hello, peoples, and welcome to Esoteric Cinema, the program where we take films and discuss the hell out of them. My name is Jason Peters, and with me, as always, is the man who secretly orchestrates every government shutdown, both U.S. and abroad, Mr. Ryan Seabold.
Ooh, what's up, Jason? How's it going, buddy?
Not bad, not bad. I know you've had a lot of time with this shutdown to just sit on your laurels and watch films, and today's is one of them. It's actually going to be the last in our war series. Can you hit us up with a description, sir?
I can. Today we're wrapping up our mini-series on classic war films as we discuss The Thin Red Line from 1998. The film is a fictional retelling of the taking of Mount Austin during the Battle of Guadalcanal during World War II, and based on a novel by James Jones in 1962. As the viewer, we are passed around narratively, experiencing the battle and war as a whole from multiple angles and points of view, seeing the impacts from the higher ranks, giving orders to the soldiers on the front lines taking them. The film stars so many people I was waiting to see if I was in this movie somehow, but we mostly spend our time with Sean Penn, Jim Caviezel, Nick Nolte, Elias Koteas, Adrian Brody, and Dash Mihawk. It was directed by the great Terrence Malick. After a 20-year hiatus from the industry, it had a budget of $52 million and brought in $98 million, was nominated for 7 Oscars, including Best Picture, Director, and Cinematography, but winning 0. Losing mostly to Shakespeare in Love and, remember that movie? And Saving Private Ryan. But awards or not, I gotta ask you as always, Jason, did this film make it over the finish line, or did it have you seeing red?
Fantastic. Ryan, I'm gonna be happy to tell you right here in my opening statement. The Thin Red Line is a significant artistic achievement from writer-director Terrence Malick. Utilizing an unconventional narrative structure, the film is a contemplative and philosophical examination of different aspects of war and what the phenomena of war has to say about the nature of humanity. At the same time, this is a challenging film, one that steadfastly refuses to provide a singular character as our protagonist and vessel through this journey, and also a film that doesn't feature a conventional 3-act structure. Instead, the film uses various extended sequences to suggest and explore different themes, and is more comfortable proposing questions about the nature of war and humanity than it is at attempting to answer them. Sound-wise, Hans Zimmer's score is beautiful and underscores the action or lack thereof at any given moment in time, while the significant voiceover from numerous actors is an effective part of the film's DNA, allowing the themes of the film to be clearly identified and explored. But all of that may pale in comparison to the gorgeous and striking nature of John Toll's cinematography, which arguably be some of the best in cinematic history, and I'm not being exaggerated there. Like, every single frame is exceptionally lit and perfectly composed. It highlights the beauty of nature and juxtaposes it against the violent machinations of war, while the camera moves with a grace and elegance that allows the philosophical spirit of filmmaker Terrence Malick to be on constant display. The Thin Red Line is a challenging film, and one that ultimately rewards you as you consider and accept both what it is and what it isn't. Ryan, how about you, sir?
Out of the 4 films we've covered in this series, The Thin Red Line is our 3rd visit to 1943. And though they share some DNA at their core, each experience was quite unique for me. We started with our jaunty whistles and devotion to nationalism with Kwai from the British point of view in 1959. Then a dreamy tour de force portraying the horrors of Nazi occupation through the eyes of a child from the Soviet point of view in 85. And now we're treated to Terrence Malick's vision, a globe-trotting American point of view from 1998, which is more existential and focused on individualism, asking questions about our place in nature and our relationship with all that surrounds us. Malick gives you a plentiful menu of characters here, so you get the full palette of emotions as you skip around experiencing fear, anger, ambivalence, escapism, etc., though an argument can be made that we skip around between them maybe so much that it begins to feel like emotional channel surfing, and we lose any feeling of camaraderie amongst the characters. I would argue that was most likely the point, as Malick presents war like a nature documentary, and cinematographer John Toll gives us such gorgeous images to act as a counterweight here that the terrifying violence and fight for survival seemed akin to a bird fighting to keep a snake out of its nest. It's easy to forget the contributions Toll gave us back then. My only critique is that it's perhaps so gorgeous that it doesn't feel of its era. The score was peak Hans Zimmer, most notably his theme Journey to the Line, which matches Malick's yin and yang vision of haunting and hopeful. This is an exceptional film that perhaps owes as much to the Kotze trilogy as it does to its war-based predecessors. We're running on vibes here. Good and evil, predator and prey. The line between these is thin, and always remember that in the end, it's all about the property.
All right, Ryan. So let's begin by discussing the photography and visual language, as this is such an important part of the film's DNA.
Absolutely.
I'll start by asking you, Ryan, what did you notice about the film's visual stylings and photography, and how did that perhaps inform your viewing experience?
Again, it was more like a nature documentary than it was a war film. It was like he was shooting the mise-en-scene of it all and then just kind of like letting what happened within the scene. For example, I would compare it to Saving Private Ryan that ran home with all the Oscars the same year. It came out just a few months before this film. Saving Private Ryan was very bleak and stark. It felt of its era. You really did feel like you were in World War II. You know, it felt like you were watching a newsreel or something like that. Like, hey, you know, our boys are fighting in the war. But this, you know, again, like I said in my opening statement, almost owes more to the Coetzee trilogy. I almost was waiting for Richard Attenborough to like start chiming in and, you know, the boys are climbing up the hill, you know. But yeah, I mean, you forget how amazing John Toll was in this 90s run that he was on. Was coming off of just a few years prior to this shooting Legends of the Fall, which was also a gorgeous film.
I believe he won an Academy Award for that one.
Yeah. Okay. That's fair. I did not know that. You know, oftentimes the most horrific things in this film are happening in the most beautiful times of day, you know, morning hour or dusk, that tall grass with the wind just blowing through. And then, you know, he would cut away, Malick, to things happening in nature. I mean, the film literally opens up with an alligator going into the swamp, you know, the predator looking for its prey.
Absolutely.
So I thought it was really, really interesting. But if I had one critique, it is, as I said in the opening statement, you know, it sometimes didn't feel of its era. It was so gorgeous that I would consistently forget that I was in 1943, if that makes sense.
I mean, I can appreciate that. And I think that, you know, when you take a step back and look at how beautiful and gorgeous this film is, I think that's part of the film's DNA and part of the philosophy of the film and part of Malick's philosophy. And that's, you know, what I appreciated about the viewing experience, because you're right. It is more like a, you know, like a Werner Herzog movie, or, you know, you put it perfectly, Koyaanisqatsi, something like that, where it's about sort of the overall aesthetic and the marriage of sound and visuals and what everything is saying. And so I think that, you know, by the visuals being so consistently focused on these highlights of nature, you know, you mentioned like the sort of suspicious alligator that opens it up. And we've got these beautiful shots of like stoic trees with, you know, light coming through and filtering through the smoke, you know, as the camera sort of almost floating through the forest. You know, we've got some really gorgeous camera movement like that. And while much of this doesn't relate directly to the story that's, you know, being presented on screen, it does sort of remind us of the themes. And I think that, you put it very well, where it's sort of like, it's almost, you know, like the way that people talk about like vibe coding. This is almost like vibe filmmaking, right? Like
really?
It really is sort of about, it's not necessarily about the story that is unfolding on screen, though at times it is, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But it's really more about what are the visuals and what is the marriage of visual and sound saying about, you know, the story that's being undertaken. And so I think one of the things that's interesting is by focusing so much on nature, you know, just again, these trees sort of standing very sentinel and stoic and impressive while these humans run around engaging in, you know, these little self-important pursuits that ultimately don't really mean much at the end of the day, kind of reminds us that like, oh yeah, you know, for all of the import and the importance of what we're doing as a race of beings, you know, mankind, nature's been around for so much longer, and nature will continue to exist before us. And, you know, we're both having an impact on nature, but nature is also much larger than us at the same time. And so, you know, that's not something that you can easily necessarily build into a screenplay without being kind of ham-fisted about it. So I liked the way that this film, the way it was presented, while at times it was like, you know, it was an interesting and a very unconventional sort of structure and presentation. So at times as I was watching, I was like, I'm not really too sure what's going on, but it definitely is also one of those films where when you reflect on it after the fact and you look back and you consider everything that was going on, some of these things come out more so and are able to be appreciated
Sure.
And we've talked about this on this show before. Like, I love films that sort of give you not only what's on the screen, but also allow you to take something back with you and consider after the fact and continue to learn more about both the film and its message.
Yeah, I mean, it was existential, right? It's it was asking a lot of questions, and the cinematography by John Toll and the direction of Terrence Malick, it wasn't there to serve a war film. It was there to serve a humanity film to me. I mean, let's not forget the opening, sequence or series of scenes take place with Jim Caviezel on the island, with the native islanders and so forth, totally at peace, swimming in the most gorgeous blue water. I mean, you just wanted to dive right in, not a care in the world. Yeah. Their life is so simple, unbothered by war, technology. They're not fighting amongst themselves. They're not living the most lavish life, but they don't need to. It's as their life is their existence was intended, just getting through day to day and serving each other and helping each other. And Jim Caviezel escaped war to enter that lifestyle. And then he was pulled away because he went AWOL. And then we, see the dichotomy of that when he's entering into war under Sean Penn's command. So, yeah, I mean, it's more questioning what is our place in the world and why are we doing this? It seems such a folly to fight. And that, I mentioned that in our in my opening statement, that line really stuck with me that Sean Penn delivers kind of towards the end of the second act, beginning of the third act, where he says, it's all about property. Kind of just so ridiculous. Like, we're fighting over dirt, guys. Like, we're losing lives. These people aren't coming back. And this is all over a property line so that these people can own more, these people can own more, and the rich get richer, and so on. And so I thought it was a really interesting, thoughtful film. Whereas, by comparison, it's really been an interesting journey, this whole thing. Like I was saying, again, in my opening statement, just with, Come and See being about the horrors and atrocities of the Nazi invasion, Kwai portrayed war completely differently, and now this. And they're three different takes about literally the same war, two of them not too far from each other.
And I do find it's interesting that so much of this film is beautiful, like not just even those landscape shots and not even just those tree shots, but also just the nature of the actors and the people, right? Like this is a big Hollywood cast with a lot of like very attractive humans,
Right.
And it's funny to sort of contrast that, like you said, to some of these other war movies that we've looked at, specifically Come and See, right? Which was so set on realism and so set on making sure that we as the audience were experiencing the horrors of war and, getting our fingernails dirty along with the protagonists and all of that. And so it was really interesting to watch a film that was going to present war, but also just have so much beauty in the form of, again, attractive people and gorgeous landscapes and lush environments that are all captured. And so I think that what this does is, rather than just have us focus on necessarily like the atrocities of war, I think you're right to a degree, showing the beauty of the natural environment at the beginning, especially as that gets contrasted later when he comes back and has a very different reaction by the people. It does sort of remind you that, like, even though this like atrocious act is going on in the form of war, like that doesn't remove the beauty from the world. Like, the beauty is still there and the beauty will always be there. Right. And that is something that's interesting to consider thematically, because that's not a message that we're typically given about war films. And I think to a degree, by when you combine that thematic message with a lot of the photos of nature and and the photography of nature tends to be like reverent almost, right? A lot of times the shots are low and looking up and we see the grandeur of nature. And I do think that, again, it's almost a thing of like, however much we focus and put importance on war and battle and accumulation of property, nature is so much grander and so much more beautiful than anything that we as humans would be able to do, Sure.
I think Malick is also, though, asking the question, is this a part of it? Is this a part of the yin and yang? I mean, he opens the film with a voiceover, a narration, I believe it's by Caviezel, saying, does nature vie against itself? Are there, kind of asking the question, is there a yin and yang? Are there two powers against itself in nature? Or is it just one singularity?
Why does nature vie with itself? The land contend with the sea. Is there an avenging power in nature? Not one power, but two.
Is it in our nature as humans to fight and war, and war amongst each other? Is nature any less beautiful when a crocodile catches its prey and eats it, or the short cutaway to the bird that's like struggling in the mud to fight for survival and most likely not making it? And then later on in the picture, you see the same alligator. I'm only assuming it's the same one. They only showed us one, and so I was kind of just assuming that. But now it's being held captive by, I believe, the Japanese, the soldiers, and it's all tied up and whatnot and set aside. So even the predator has become prey down the food chain. So the nature has its order, and it has its food chain. And nature wars against itself. Nature has storms and tornadoes. Nature is very destructive, fires and hurricanes and so forth. Nature can be very violent.
Yeah.
So
even violence itself can be beautiful, even contradictory.
That's what I'm saying.
When you look at like a giant explosion or something like that, like it could be horrific and the ramifications of it are atrocious, but also there's just a certain beauty to watching the flames erupt and all of that.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, I mean, here in Florida, we have some really nasty storms and hurricanes. I've been through many. I used to cover them for NBC, and there's a beauty in that, watching the storms roll in. I've been in the eyes of hurricanes, and that's gorgeous. And seeing the birds come out and all of that for 15 minutes while the eye of the hurricane passes over. So yeah, all that to say, I think Malick is really digging deep here and swinging for the fences for existential questions on our place in the world. And so is this a war film? Absolutely it is. But is it so much more? Yeah, it really is.
With having talked about those actors, let's go ahead and discuss the cast and the film's approach to its characters, how those two intertwine, as well as the impact this has on both theme and our viewing experience as a whole. So
I wanted to talk to you about this.
So then, cool. So just let me ask you then, what did you notice and have to say about the cast and characters of The Thin Red Line?
Because of those larger themes, because of everything we just talked about, that was done so well. I did feel less connected to the characters as a whole. I felt like they were there only to, and I think Malick would agree with me, in fact, they were there only to convey those points that we just made and discussed. And because of that, I would argue that some of our extraneous time spent diving into some of the characters' backstories felt a little bloated. Like the love story, for example, by one of the officers that we go back and he's reading the notes from his wife that's back home. And then we find out later in the picture that she wants a divorce and she's fallen in love with another man.
Sure.
High level, I could look at that and say that, Malick is kind of zooming in a little bit and saying this is also the nature of man. And we fight amongst ourselves interpersonally, even outside of war and all that. And you can get really deep and say, and try to pick it apart for that reason. But I won't say it served the picture very well. And I don't think it attached me to that character. I think we spent too much time sometimes in those moments. Like I said in my opening statement, it was kind of a round robin as we were skipping through so many characters that the camaraderie amongst the soldiers, for example, late in the second act, after they've taken the hill and they're being sent on another mission. And Adrian Brody's character, Fife, I believe his name is being sent out. And then Caviezel's character is like, no, I'll go, whatever. And then when Caviezel eventually gets shot because of this and does a heroic thing, those moments kind of felt a little flat to me because I was never really attached to the character. I was attached to the themes because he was using these characters as a vehicle. So versus like Saving Private Ryan, for example, when something would happen to those characters, when Barry Pepper was in the Watchtower and he's shooting off those sniper shots at the end of the film, man, like Goosebump City, like you were rooting for this guy because you were in it with them. You felt something for this character. It wasn't about themes. That was a character-driven movie. So it's hard to do both. And that's something I've never really thought of before, to do a theme-based movie and a character-based movie. The character stuff just kind of felt like a tag on or an afterthought. Do you agree or what are your thoughts on that? I was really curious how you felt about that.
I think a lot of work went into almost reducing the characters or homogenizing them to a degree such that rather than thinking about them as individuals, it was almost looking at them as like a collective of soldiers. You know,
Yes.
I think that the film does this very intentionally and through certain ways. Like, for example, I think that a lot of the actors in this film not only look fairly similar, but like especially sound very similar. And even the direction of the cadences of their voices and the register at which they speak, it's almost as though they've been directed to almost, you know, mirror one another with those inflections and speech patterns, etc.
Okay.
And I think that in doing so, we sort of jump around to remember like, hey, there are a number of different soldiers, but at the end of the day, they're all kind of going through the same thing. They all kind of have very similar thoughts and ideas. You know, I think the film has at least 3 different soldiers doing narrative voiceover at different times throughout the film. It might be more. And if you take a step back, any one of those narrative voiceovers could be just swapped around with any of the characters.
Sure.
It's not like when Sean Penn's voiceover is on, he's got a unique point of view that's different from Jim Caviezel's Private Witt. That's different from, you know, I believe it's Elias Codius. I forget who the other voiceover is, but they all are having these very similar outlooks and responses to the war and to the nature of what's going on around them. And so again, I think that it's a very intentional move by Malick, whereas to your point, Saving Private Ryan was very much more about that band of brothers type of thing. Like, hey, here's these, you know, 7, 8, however many unique individuals. And you've got Tom Hanks and he's the school teacher and he's this guy. And, you know, we're going out to save little baby boy Matt Damon, whose 3 brothers were died. And then, you know, Ed Burns has his, like, everybody was very uniquely personified, let's say, in that movie. And it's like, okay, everybody's banding together, even though everybody's sort of been homogenized and reduced to the same level. You don't get the sense that it's this, you know, collective band of brothers. It's almost like everybody's going through their own battle, but it just so happens that everyone's battle is very similar. Does that make sense?
No, totally. I agree 100%. The only time it served the picture, the relationships and stuff served this picture, was really the moments between Travolta and Nolte and Cotius on down the line. Because what I did find interesting was the military mindset, how it fit into that folly of war narrative that was kind of overarching. You know, when you see Nolte continuously jumping in amongst all the horrors and people dying, talking about, oh, you know, medals and ranks and honors versus the lives that were lost and the personal stuff. And those moments did kind of strike home to me. But when it started to get into any kind of backstory and stuff, I felt like that didn't really, it was almost counterintuitive to what the film was doing.
Absolutely. Now let's discuss Malick's screenplay, which might be the most unconventional aspect of a pretty unconventional film. And I think it has a significant impact on the overall, you know, resulting cinematic experience. And maybe this also has an impact on what you're talking about, you know, in terms of being sort of almost, you know, drawn away from what was going on screen at certain times, because I think that the screenplay's acts are rather discordant if you actually look at the relationship between the first, second, and third acts.
Okay.
Like the first act doesn't really set up any sort of story or narrative. It's not, you know, to use a film from this series of war films, like it's not Apocalypse Now, you know, where Captain Willard is brought in and he's given his orders and they play, you know, the haunting speeches from our antagonist, Colonel Kurt, and set up that, you know, the villain. You know, it doesn't sort of do any of that traditional first act work that a screenplay traditionally does. To your point from earlier, it mostly shows Private Witt, Jim Caviezel's character, just kind of existing in happiness and peace among the natives of the island after he's gone AWOL. And, you know, he does get scooped up by commanders who do send him to battle. But that entire first act is kind of just him existing and this tribe just, you know, sort of existing peacefully in nature and setting up the juxtaposition of what's to come in the second act, which is much more traditional. The
first act gets him to the hill and it sets up, you know, the war and the battle and whatnot. But to your point, I'll kind of volley it back to you. What's the MacGuffin in this film? Who's the protagonist and who's the antagonist?
And there's not, you know, there's
none. Right.
Like I said at the top, like there's no protagonist to sort of guide you through this story. And again, but by doing so, what it means is, okay, we're not attached to a character. Now we can sort of start to look at the film from a different perspective. And then that's where the whole nature of being a thematic based film starts to present itself, because Malick doesn't want you necessarily invested in this particular soldier's story. He's, instead of trying to do the, drill in super deep on this one guy, he's trying to take this sort of wide, almost macro look at, war and what's going on. And, by doing so, that allows us to take that position. But then I did think it was interesting that once we get to the second act, it is sort of much more traditional in that we do get a situation, a narrative situation. A captain has just been given orders to send his men to certain death by this crazed Lieutenant Colonel Tall, played by Nick Nolte, and he steadfastly refuses, and he's not going to do it. And so now we have this situation, and there's a back and forth, and that's much more traditional from a narrative screenplay position. And so it's interesting to note that like the first act kind of refuses any sort of setup. Then the second act does have a narrative setup. But to your point from earlier, we really don't have a protagonist. We've got a protagonist and antagonist for this second act specifically, so to speak, but they're not the protagonist and antagonist of the story as a whole. And so, again, that's why I say that this narrative structure is very interesting. And then we've got the third act, which kind of matches the first a little bit more closely in that it's a lot of mood and theme. But then, we do get also some of the narrative element where Witt and the others are all sent upstream. And then, Private Witt is given the chance to, do his heroic, sacrificing himself, and he's killed by the Japanese. So if you look at it through a lens of how does it affect a protagonist, hero's journey type of story with a MacGuffin and a 3-act structure, it doesn't, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad film. Again, like this is it's not like, it's not like they didn't know how to write a screenplay and just bungled it along the way. Like, no, they made a very distinct decision to structure a film uniquely in a different way that wasn't going to focus on, the conventional narrative structure. And while at times that's a bit challenging, again, going back and reflecting on it, it's a very interesting experience, especially for people like us who have seen so many films. Every now and then a film comes along and kind of tweaks the way that it's presented and kind of makes you realize like, oh, you know what? Yeah, not everything has to follow the blueprint. Sometimes the blueprint is great. And sometimes when you have these, true masters that, learn the rules so that they know how to break them, sometimes it ends up being, just sort of self-indulgent and over the top and just kind of, you roll your eyes. But then other times, like with this one, you get a really, really interesting and unique perspective.
Some of that, I think, can be attributed to the style of filmmaking that Terrence Malick went through to get this done. Remember, he was coming off a 20-year hiatus where no one knew where he was. He went off the grid for a while and came back out of nowhere. Hollywood was vying for his attention, and he got this movie and got a budget. Actors were crawling over each other to be in the film. That's why it has such a crazy cast. I mean, blink and you miss it. John C. Reilly's in it. A baby-faced Jared Leto shows up out of the grass and disappears. Like, whoa, like it's just crazy how many people were in it. And so many people there were entire through lines for characters that were just cut in post-production. I'm sure you saw Bill Pullman, Gary Oldman, Mickey Rourke, Martin Sheen from Apocalypse Now, all had roles in this film that ended up being cut. And
even some of the people that made it, they had their storylines like reduced, Correct. So like like we see John Cusack, he had a much bigger part. Adrian Brody apparently had like a whole ass subplot that was like supposed to be a major part. Yeah, and he was like entirely cut out. And he's even one of the people that kind of made it more than the other people that got cut out,
Right.
So yeah, it was just too much to be able to fit into one film,
Taking it a step further, Fife's character, it's my understanding, is the main character of the book. It's who the author based his own role on. So Yeah, Malick would often throw pages out on set. He would often turn the camera and go shoot nature and stuff and just go do what he wanted to do that day. And actors were kind of standing around being like, what is he doing? So it's a very storied film. We don't have to go into all the details here. It'd be a 3-hour show, but it's a very storied film when you start to pull the layers back and realize Terrence Malick's filmmaking style. And I think that has a lot to do with the narrative structure and how it ended up. Also worth mentioning, this is another one of those films like Apocalypse Now where Malick spent almost 2 years editing it. And the studio was like, dude, come on. Like, we need something. Like, let's roll it out there. And he's like, I'll get to, when it's ready, when it's done. And so, a lot of what we see now in the finished film was all created in post-production, where he was finding the story by editing it together. And so really, really interesting the way it all came together. But again, pretty awesome. I still love this movie.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and finish this episode with a discussion surrounding those themes, which might be the biggest single piece of the film's filmmaking pie in terms of Malick's intent and what he was looking to do with this film. Ryan, what were some of the specific themes that stood out to you? I know we've mentioned a couple of them up to now, but let's just go ahead and still identify what were some of those themes that jumped out to you from the film.
I think in the lack of camaraderie, what stood out most to me is individualism. So if you're not going to give me that Band of Brothers theme, like a Saving Private Ryan, and you're not going to give me a MacGuffin or a protagonist or an antagonist, what I'm left with then is individualism and isolation and just my place in the world. It makes it very reflective. And both, in not only me, but like in modern times. And you look around in the world that we're living in now, and it starts to really make you think and wonder the folly of some of the endeavors we're engaged in our generation. I thought, it was a real big thought piece, being so abstract and being shot, like I said, not necessarily of its era, quote unquote, as like a bleak World War II movie, full of blues and grays and stuff like that, like Kaminsky shot Saving Private Ryan. Or Come and See even, for that matter. I think that then you can take this and apply it to any war or any, themes of existential questioning or whatever, like our place in the world and what it's all about and what happens after we're gone and so on down the line.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think that there's, kind of the overall theme that we see in a lot of films, which is kind of like, war, what is it good for, right? But I think that in a way, like, as opposed to necessarily embracing Come and See's like war is atrocities and, just looking at like really the worst aspects of that. I think it's more of just like, isn't this dumb? Like, I think just Malick thinks war is just kind of dumb. And it's like, isn't this silly, these trifles that we get ourselves into to just sort of waste time and dally about, the whole thing's ridiculous. So there's definitely that cynicism there.
There is,
and I do,
or is it in our nature? Like I said, is it a part of who we are as humans in the same way that predators and prey exist all throughout nature, in the same way that storms and disasters happen and so on, just like I said earlier? I think he's genuinely questioning that without an answer provided. I think he leaves it open-ended.
I do think he suggests that mankind in our natural element at least is essentially good, right? We see like the tribal people and when, the soldier is AWOL and he's not fighting a battle and he's just kind of existing. Everyone's happy. Everything's good. Everything's bright and beautiful. So it's almost as though like in our natural element, like we default to good, but there's just this aspect of war that brings out the worst of us. And it's kind of something that's not like we could put it on the shelf, but we're not going to. Mm-hmm. And I also just think that the film sort of posits that like war just has like a numbing effect on the spirit and soul of man to a degree,
Okay.
It's like when Private Witt goes back to the island, and all the tribal people are just like looking at him suspiciously and turning away from him. Like he hasn't done anything to them specifically, but it's more just like they sense that like he's now become this person of violence and that's not what they are about as people, Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I would add, just to kind of further prove your point and put a button on it, the very brief time, but we do spend some time with the Japanese soldiers when they take the hill and the fear in their eyes. And the buried Japanese soldier that someone stumbles upon, I forget who it was, I think it might have been Caviezel, and he said, he hears in his head, were you loved? you will die too, kind of thing. And so basically holding a mirror up and saying, you're no better than me. You're in this, we're all in this together. I died, you'll die tomorrow. None of it matters. Yeah. And so that kind of, when you see it from the Japanese side and see that they're not evil people. I looked up the translation when Caviezel gets captured at the very end and he's about to be shot. And the soldier that's holding the gun up says something along the lines of, and I'm paraphrasing, "You're the one that killed my friends. I don't want to kill you. Put your gun down and get on your knees," kind of thing. Like, look, you did these horrors to us. I'm trying to be cool here. Don't be an idiot. And he gets himself shot. So, they're both kind of, both sides weren't, again, there's no real protagonist or antagonist. And the whole MacGuffin is property that nobody wants. So anyway.
Absolutely. Ryan, before we go, is there anything else you would like to bring up?
Just the sound design. I thought that the score, yes, absolutely. Hans Zimmer crushes on this one. But even more than that, we talk about the pictures of nature, all the, wonderful pictures that John Toll gave us in this, but also the sound design and the sounds of nature surrounding us. There were moments of stillness and just, where you could hear the birds and the wind. When you would see those gorgeous shots, you would hear everything all around you. It was very immersive and it brought peace. There were moments of horrific battle in this, but there were also moments of real stillness and peace and I think the sound design made some of those images just as beautiful to me as the images themselves.
100%. Now, before we move on to our formal star ratings, we'll conclude our discussion with our feature 3 scenes, where Ryan and myself will note the 3 scenes that we feel best represent our response to this film. Ryan, buddy, as always, I will let you go first.
You may live to regret it. All right. My first is the opening scene on the island. I think that anchors the entire rest of the film and kind of holds up a counterweight to what's going on and Caviezel's journey and so on. What, could have been or could be if we would just get over ourselves. Next, I would point out the confrontation of Nolte and Cateus. It's kind of the military versus humanity. He's talking about awards and honors and, you're not good enough and you're not made out for this. But then you see Elias Koteas's Staros character, I think his name is, talk about a couple scenes later, you're my sons, you're all my sons' family and all of that. So that Nolte versus Koteas scene where they finally meet on the hill and Nolte kind of takes over. I thought that was a real big turning point if I was going to latch onto something narratively and character-wise and kind of anchor myself in something. That stood out to me. And then the scene I kind of just mentioned, the captured Japanese soldier, where he was asking, were you loved? You too will die. I thought that was a really existential way to summarize everything that we had just experienced and kind of just in a few brief sentences, short, almost a haiku of sorts. He kind of was able to make you really kind of hold a mirror up to what was going on and wrap it all up and leave it kind of open-ended, but very, very thoughtful and warm and loving. How about you?
Yeah, well, in this case, it looks like you got 2 or 3 of the same. So, yeah, I did have the opening sequence as well as my first, just Malick showing off that natural, beautiful, undisturbed jungle, especially with the shot of that alligator that we all love, right? And then the other of Lieutenant Colonel Tall, which is Nick Nolte's character, versus Captain Staros. Just, of Staros defying orders to express just the dualistic nature of men, right? Those who want to protect versus those who want to attack, but with both doing so in the same name and vein of honor and dignity, just through very different lenses. And let's also just acknowledge it's a fantastic piece of acting from Nick Nolte.
Oh, dude, so good.
Yeah, wonderful. So the only, the one that we had different is I had for my third, the scene of Private Witt returning to the Islanders. I spoke to it briefly just a little bit ago, just him showing the effect that war has had on his spirit. Like you said, his light is now gone. And whereas before everyone was warm and bright, they're now cold and mistrusting, and they can sense that his spirit has been affected. So for a formal star rating, I am going to go ahead and give this film 4.5 out of 5 stars. Really loved this film. Definitely a challenging film, a film that I could see maybe getting up to that full, 4 3/4 or 5 stars on repeat viewings now that I sort of have had a chance to really digest and understand the film. But, who's to say if that would necessarily be the case? Ryan, how about you, sir?
I'm going 4 3/4.
Okay.
Dude, it's so hard not to give this film 5 stars, but I feel like
right?
we've been just dropping 5 stars left and right. You get 5 stars and you get 5 stars. It's like, geez. So, this is not a film that is for everyone. This is not a film that you could just put on a Friday and be like, yeah, let's watch a war film, whatever. It's a thought piece. It's a specific use only kind of deal. It's kind of its own thing. And so, yeah, I'm going to give this just a little under and give it 4 3/4.
To all of you watching, thanks for taking part in our discussion of Terrence Malick's The Thin Red Line. You can find us on Instagram and TikTok at Esoteric Cinema. And if you enjoyed this review, you can help us out by liking this video and subscribing to our channel right here on YouTube. Either way, your support is very much appreciated. For myself, Jason Peters, and my good friend, Ryan Siebold, this has been Esoteric Cinema. Continue to appreciate film and enjoy the movies.